"The dead man is in there," said the girl, looking at the sealed tunnel, but when they shine a light, something unexpected appears. Comment saying what you thought of this story, giving it a rating from 0 to 10, and tell me what city you're watching from. I really want to know if you liked my story and get to know you better, so subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The silver Mercedes-Benz cut through the muggy air of that March afternoon, kicking up a cloud of red dust as William Thompson parked near the abandoned railway tunnel on the outskirts of Red Creek. The 52-year-old businessman took a deep breath, feeling that familiar sense of unease that always came over him when he visited derelict properties. There was something about these forgotten places that drew him in inexplicably, as if they carried secrets whispered by time. William adjusted his Italian tie and stepped out of the vehicle, his Italian leather shoes contrasting with the arid, cracked ground. As the owner of Thompson Properties, one of the largest real estate companies in the region, he had amassed a considerable fortune by transforming abandoned sites into profitable ventures. Shopping malls, residential condominiums, business complexes, everything sprang up under his keen commercial eye. But his real pleasure was in exploring these forgotten lands alone, walking among ruins and wild vegetation, searching for something he couldn't quite define himself. The railway tunnel rose before him like a dark mouth in the mountainside, its stone walls covered in moss and faded graffiti. The railway had been decommissioned in the late 80s, when highways became more viable for transporting goods. Since then, the place had remained abandoned, serving only as a shelter for the homeless and an impromptu garbage dump. William was walking toward the tunnel entrance when a sudden movement caught his attention. A small child, apparently 4 years old, emerged from behind a pile of rubble, running toward him. The girl was dirty, barefoot, her clothes torn and stained with dirt. Her tangled brown hair framed a thin face, and her dark eyes shone with a disturbing intensity. "The dead man is in there," the child repeated insistently, pointing a dirty little finger toward the dark entrance of the tunnel. "The dead man is in there, mister. He won't come out." William stopped abruptly, his heart racing. For reasons he couldn't comprehend, the girl's voice carried a genuine desperation that cut through his carefully constructed emotional defenses. He knelt, bringing himself to the child's level. "What's your name?" he asked in a gentle voice, struggling to remain calm in the face of this unexpected situation. "Sophia," the girl replied, wiping her dirty nose on the sleeve of her faded t-shirt. "Did you come to get the dead man?" Before William could answer, a hoarse voice echoed from somewhere near the tunnel. "Sophia, where are you, girl?" An elderly woman appeared, leaning on a makeshift cane made from a tree branch. Her grey hair was tied in a messy bun, and her clothes, though patched, seemed clean. "Grandma Rose!" Sophia exclaimed, running toward the woman. "The handsome man came to get the dead man." Rose looked at William with suspicion, her dark eyes evaluating every detail of his appearance. At 78, she had learned to recognize dangerous types, and this well-dressed man in such a desolate place aroused her suspicions. "Are you lost, sir?" she asked, keeping Sophia close to her. "Actually, I'm interested in this land," William explained, standing up slowly so as not to startle the pair. "I'm a real estate developer, William Thompson." The name seemed to stir a distant memory in Rose's mind. She frowned, but said nothing. William noticed the reaction and felt a pang of curiosity. "Do you live here?" he asked, scanning the surroundings and spotting a small makeshift tent made of tarpaulin and pieces of wood near the abandoned tracks. "For now," Rose replied, her voice heavy with resignation. "We have nowhere else to go." Sophia tugged at her grandmother's skirt, whispering something in her ear. Rose sighed deeply, seeming to struggle with a difficult decision. "The girl found a doll near here," she said finally, pointing to the area near the tunnel. "Ever since, she won't stop talking about the dead man. I can't get this idea out of her head." A chill ran down William's spine. A doll. "Show him, Sophia," Rose asked reluctantly. The girl quickly disappeared behind the tent and returned carrying an old, partially broken porcelain doll. The toy was covered in dirt, but it was still possible to see the details of its delicate craftsmanship. William took the doll with trembling hands, turning it over until he found a small tag sewn into the faded fabric of the dress. His blood ran cold when he read Eleanor, 1987. The world seemed to spin around him. Eleanor was the name of his sister, who had disappeared when he was just 15 in 1987. She was 12 at the time, and no one ever knew what had happened to her. The family had searched for months. The police had investigated, but Eleanor had simply vanished without a trace. Where exactly did she find this?" he managed to ask, his voice coming out weaker than he'd intended. Rose watched the sudden change in William's demeanor, her suspicion intensifying. "Over there," she pointed to an area of dense vegetation near the tunnel entrance. She was digging with her hands, looking for worms to go fishing when she found it. William looked at the girl, who watched him with those dark, penetrating eyes. "Sophia, can you show me exactly where you found the doll?" The child nodded enthusiastically and began walking toward the spot, followed by William and a reluctant Rose. The ground was covered with wild vegetation and accumulated trash, but Sophia seemed to know exactly where she was going. She stopped near a small hole. She had dug in the earth and pointed down. It was here. The doll was buried deep, but she wanted to get out, so I helped. William knelt at the indicated spot, his hands trembling as he cleared away the loose dirt. Within a few minutes of superficial digging, his fingers hit something metallic. Carefully, he brought to the surface a small, delicate ring, partially oxidized by time. The air left his lungs as if he'd been punched. It was the ring he himself had given to Eleanor on her 12th birthday, just a few months before she disappeared. Simple silver ring with a small blue stone that she adored. "My God," he murmured, tears blurring his vision. Rose approached, seeing the man's emotional state. "Sir, did you know someone who—" "It was my sister," William interrupted, his voice choked with emotion. "Eleanor was my sister. She disappeared 36 years ago. I never knew what happened to her." The revelation created a heavy silence among the three. Sophia, not fully understanding the gravity of the moment, kept pointing at the tunnel. "The dead man is in there," she insisted. "He wants someone to find him. The doll told me." William wiped his eyes and looked at the child with a mixture of gratitude and terror. This small, fearless girl had found a clue that could finally answer the questions that had haunted him for decades. But the prospect of discovering the truth about Eleanor's fate also terrified him. The discovery of Eleanor's ring changed everything. William spent the next 2 weeks returning daily to the railway tunnel, always with excavation tools and a determination that grew with each day. Rose and Sophia watched him with a mixture of curiosity and concern, the child always repeating her words about the dead man waiting in the tunnel. During these visits, William began to get to know the pair living in the makeshift tent better. Rose had lost her small house on the outskirts of Red Creek when she could no longer pay the rent after her Social Security payments were cut due to bureaucratic issues. Sophia had come to her in a peculiar way 2 years ago. "I found her right here, in this very spot," Rose revealed one afternoon, as she watched William methodically excavate the area around the tunnel. She was even smaller, barely speaking. She was alone, crying, calling for her mother. "I waited for days to see if anyone would come for her, but no one ever did." "Did you try to find her family?" William asked, pausing his work to wipe the sweat from his face. "I did. I took her to the police station, spoke with social services, but with no documents, no information about who her parents were, they couldn't do much. They said they were going to put her in a shelter, but Rose looked at Sophia, who was playing with colored pebbles. I didn't have the heart to leave her. She had already suffered so much. William absorbed this information, feeling a strange connection forming between his search for Eleanor and Sophia's mysterious story. Two lost children, separated by decades, but united by that dark place. It was in the third week of digging that William made his next disturbing discovery. In an area further from the tunnel entrance, his fingers found a small metallic object. When he cleaned it, he discovered it was a gold butterfly-shaped brooch, exactly like the one Eleanor wore in her hair on the day she disappeared. "There's more buried here," he murmured, his heart racing. Lot more." That night, in his luxurious apartment in downtown Red Creek, William made a decision that would change the course of his company and his life. He called Caroline Mitchell, his partner and cousin, canceling all his appointments for the coming months. "William, have you lost your mind?" Caroline shouted over the phone. "We have 3 projects underway, meetings scheduled with investors, contracts to sign. You can't just disappear because of ghosts from the past." "They're not ghosts, Caroline. Eleanor was there. She was in that tunnel. Your sister disappeared 36 years ago. You were a kid, you don't remember it clearly." "I remember everything," William interrupted, his voice charged with emotion. "I remember the blue dress she was wearing. I remember the song she used to sing. I remember the fear in her eyes in the last days before she vanished. Someone did something terrible to my sister, and I'm going to find out what." Caroline sighed deeply on the other end of the line. She had known William since childhood and knew how Eleanor's disappearance had scarred him. The whole family had suffered, but for the older brother who felt responsible for protecting her, the guilt had turned into a wound that never fully healed. "All right," she said finally, "but you have 2 months. After that, if you don't bring back concrete answers, I'm taking full control of the company." The next day, William returned to the tunnel with professional excavation equipment. He had discreetly hired a retired archaeologist from a nearby town, Professor Miller, who agreed to help for a handsome sum and complete secrecy about the work. "Interesting," the professor murmured, examining the objects found. "These items have been buried for decades. The oxidation and wear suggest at least 30 years underground." As they worked, Sophia approached, carrying something in her small hands. "I found more things," she said, showing a broken gold chain and a small pair of glasses with one cracked lens. William froze when he saw the glasses. They were identical to the ones Eleanor used for reading, a peculiarity of her vision that had manifested early. The knot in his stomach tightened. "Sophia," he called softly, "can you show me where you found these things?" The girl led him to an area near the side of the tunnel where the vegetation was denser. There, she pointed to several spots on the ground, as if she had a mental map of where she had found objects. "The doll said there are more things down there," she said with unnerving naturalness. "She wants me to find everything so the mister can take it away." Professor Miller exchanged a meaningful look with William. "This child has a remarkable instinct for locating buried objects. It's almost as if she knows where to look," William completed, a disturbing theory beginning to form in his mind. That afternoon, as they expanded the excavation area, William decided to broach a subject he had been avoiding. He'd approached Rose, who was resting in the shade of the tent. "Rose, I need to ask you a difficult question. When you found Sophia here 2 years ago, did she say anything about this place? Any clue as to why she was here alone?" The old woman hesitated, looking at the girl playing near the tunnel. "She said strange things in the first few months, terrible nightmares during the night. She would scream about the girl who sings, about someone who couldn't get out of the dark. I thought it was trauma from being abandoned, you know." "And what about her parents? Did she ever mention names, places, anything? Once she said her mother had gone to find the girl in the tunnel. But she was too little. The words came out all jumbled. Rose paused, studying William's tense face. Why do you ask? Do you think Sophia has some connection to your sister? William didn't know how to answer. With each passing day, the coincidences piled up in a way that was impossible to ignore. A child abandoned in the same place where his sister had disappeared, with a supernatural ability to find buried objects, talking about things child her age shouldn't know. The following week, Professor Miller made a discovery that changed everything. In a deeper excavation near the tunnel entrance, he found fragments of blue fabric preserved by the local moisture. When he showed the samples to William, the businessman had no doubt. It was her dress, he whispered, his hands trembling as he touched the faded pieces of fabric. Eleanor was wearing this dress the day she disappeared. I remember it perfectly. There's more, the professor said gravely. I also found some small bones. I'll need an expert to be sure, but... No, William interrupted, his voice breaking. You don't need an expert. I know what they are. It was at that moment that Michael Sullivan appeared. The 58-year-old man emerged suddenly in the excavation area, visibly disturbed to see all the activity in a place that had remained untouched for decades. What are you people doing here? He asked in a tense voice, his eyes scanning the dig site and equipment. Michael Sullivan, William introduced himself, recognizing the name he had researched in the old railway archives. You worked here in the 80s, didn't you? Michael's hands began to tremble visibly when William mentioned the period, and his eyes avoided direct contact. I did, but that was a long time ago. Why do you want to know? I'm looking for information about my sister, Eleanor. She disappeared in 1987. The name hit Michael like a gunshot. The man turned completely pale, took a few steps back and looked around desperately, as if searching for an escape route. I don't know anything about any Eleanor, he lied, but his voice betrayed his growing nervousness. Are you sure? William insisted, stepping closer. Because we've found several things buried here, things that belong to her. Michael looked at the excavations, at the objects displayed on the makeshift table, and finally at Sophia, who was watching him with those same penetrating eyes. The girl approached him slowly. You know the dead man, she said with unnerving simplicity. You know where he is. The innocent accusation from a 4-year-old child had the power of an earthquake. Michael staggered, cold sweat pouring down his face, and for a moment it looked like he was going to faint. I have to go, he stammered, turning to leave. Michael, William called out firmly, if you know anything about what happened to Eleanor, tell me. Please, she was just a child. The former railway worker stopped, his back bent by the weight of a secret carried for decades, and William knew he was about to discover a truth that would change his life forever. Michael couldn't leave. The weight of the secret he had carried for 36 years had become unbearable, especially after seeing the accusing eyes of little Sophia. He turned slowly, his face marked by decades of remorse, and faced William with the expression of a defeated man. There are things you won't want to know, he said in a hoarse voice. Things that will destroy any peace you still have. My peace was destroyed a long time ago, William replied firmly. The day Eleanor disappeared. Now I need the truth. Michael looked around, watching Professor Miller, who had discreetly moved away to give them privacy, Rose, who held Sophia close to her, and finally the excavations that exposed buried secrets. He knew there was no escape. It was 1987, he began, sitting heavily on a nearby rock. I was a maintenance supervisor for the railway, but things were tough. The company was cutting costs, threatening to lay off employees. I had a family to support, 2 young daughters. William moved closer, all his senses focused on the words Michael was about to speak. I started selling some surplus materials, iron, copper, parts that officially nobody would miss. I had a scheme with Robert Davis and Charlie Baker. We sold it to a scrapyard, split the money. It wasn't much, but it helped. And Eleanor found out, William concluded, his stomach tightening. She used to come here to play, even though she knew it was dangerous. One afternoon, she showed up right when we were loading a batch of old rails into a pickup truck. She saw everything, heard our conversation about the prices, about how no one would find out. Michael paused, wiping away the tears that began to fall. She didn't say anything at the time, just watched from a distance. But the next day she came back, said she was going to tell her father about the rails because stealing was wrong. My God, William murmured, picturing his small, brave sister confronting 3 adult men. We panicked. Charlie said we had to do something to stop her from talking. Robert suggested we just scare her, that it would be enough to keep a kid quiet. Sophia stirred restlessly in Rose's arms, as if sensing the tension in the atmosphere. The girl stared at Michael and whispered, "He hurt the girl who sings." The child's words made Michael sob openly. "We didn't want to hurt her. It was an accident. I swear to God it was an accident." "What happened?" William demanded, his voice barely controlled. "Charlie followed her when she was leaving and tried to scare her, yelled that bad things would happen if she opened her mouth. Eleanor ran, desperate, and we ran after her. She went into the tunnel to hide." Michael pointed to the dark entrance behind them. The tunnel had structural problems at the time. There were cracks in the walls, loose rocks. Eleanor hid in a side cavity, but when we went in looking for her, there was a cave-in. William completed, the pieces of the puzzle fitting together horribly in his mind. Some rocks fell, blocking the entrance to the cavity where she was. We were desperate. We tried to move the rocks, but it was too much, too heavy. Eleanor was screaming from the other side, saying she was hurt, that she couldn't move properly. "And you just left her there?" William exploded, advancing on Michael with clenched fists. "No, we tried. We spent hours trying to move the rocks, but they were too big, too heavy. We needed equipment we didn't have. Charlie said we had to get help, call the fire department, but that would mean admitting you were there, admitting the theft scheme," William said with bitterness. "Robert completely panicked, said if we told the truth, we'd all go to jail, that our families would be left with nothing. He convinced us it was better to wait, that maybe we could get her out ourselves during the night." "But you didn't come back," William stated, already knowing the end of the story. Michael shook his head, sobbing. "When we came back the next morning, we didn't hear anything anymore. Complete silence. Charlie went down on a rope to check, and when he came back up, he was pale as a ghost. He said it was too late. She died alone, scared, calling for you to get her out," William murmured, the pain in his voice cutting the air like a razor. "We covered it all. Up, we moved rocks, dirt, put vegetation on top. We made it look like nothing ever happened there, and then we never spoke of it again. We each went on with our lives, carrying the weight." Professor Miller, who had overheard part of the confession from a distance, approached slowly. "The side cavity is about 50 yards from the main entrance of the tunnel," he said. "If we knew where to look—" "I know where it is," Michael interrupted in a broken voice. "I've never forgotten. Not for a single day in 36 years. William took a deep breath, fighting the mixture of anger and sorrow that threatened to destroy him. His sister had died because of the cowardice of 3 men who chose to protect their petty crimes instead of saving a child's life. "Are Robert and Charlie still alive?" he asked. "Charlie died 10 years ago, lung cancer, but Robert still lives here in Red Creek, works at an auto repair shop downtown." "Does he know you're telling me this?" "We haven't spoken since Charlie died. But he'll be desperate when he finds out. Robert was always afraid someone would discover it." At that moment, Rose approached, still. carrying Sophia in her arms. The old woman had heard the entire confession, and her face showed a mixture of compassion and sadness. "Sophia has been talking about this story since I found her," she said softly. "She always knew someone was in there. Always talked about the girl who couldn't get out." William looked at the girl in Rose's arms. Sophia stared at him with those dark, penetrating eyes, and for the first time since he'd met her, she gave a sad smile. "The girl who sings isn't scared anymore," she said in her small voice. "She knew her. Brother would come for her." The child's words struck William like lightning. How could she know Eleanor was his sister? How could she know about the fear? An impossible theory began to form in his mind, a connection that defied all logic. "Michael," he said finally, "I want you to take me to the exact spot where Eleanor is, and I want Robert Davis's address." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to bring her home. After 36 years, I'm finally going to bring her home." Michael nodded, knowing the time had come to face the consequences of his actions. As they walked toward the tunnel, William couldn't stop thinking about Sophia, the girl who had appeared in the same place where Eleanor had died, who knew impossible things about the past, who had guided him to the answers he had sought for decades. Coincidence or something more? On an afternoon that had already brought impossible revelations, William began to wonder if there were still greater mysteries waiting to be discovered. And what if Sophia wasn't just an abandoned child, but a crucial piece of a puzzle that had not yet been fully assembled? The shadows began to lengthen as they approached the tunnel entrance, carrying rescue equipment and the determination to finally bring Eleanor back into the light. The recovery of Eleanor's remains took 3 days of meticulous work inside the tunnel. Professor Miller coordinated the operation with the precision of an experienced archaeologist, while William watched every move with a broken heart. When they finally brought his sister back into the sunlight, he felt as if a part of his soul that had been lost for 36 years had finally returned to its place. During those days, William spent more time with Rose and Sophia and began to notice details that had previously gone unnoticed. The girl constantly hummed a specific melody, the same song Eleanor had loved as a child. Sophia drew birds in the sand, identical to the ones his sister used to doodle in her school notebooks. Even more disturbing were the moments when the child spoke of things that had happened decades before her birth, always with a chilling naturalness. "Rose," William said one morning as he watched Sophia play near the spot where they had found Eleanor, "I need to ask you a very specific question. When you found Sophia here 2 years ago, how old did you estimate she was?" The old woman reflected carefully. "About 2, maybe 2.5. She was very small, could barely speak properly. And she never mentioned anything about her biological family, nothing about where she was born." "She said something strange once," Rose recalled slowly. "She said her mother went to find the grandmother who was lost in the dark. At the time, I thought it was the fantasy of a traumatized child." A shiver ran down William's spine. An impossible suspicion was taking shape in his mind, but he needed more information. That afternoon, he visited Robert Davis at his auto repair shop. The 55-year-old man nearly fainted when he saw William walk into his establishment. Robert had always known this day would come, but he had spent decades trying to convince himself that the past would remain buried forever. "Michael told me everything," William said without preamble. "About your scheme, about Eleanor, about how you left her to die in that tunnel." Robert dropped the tool he was holding, his hands shaking violently. "Mr. Thompson, we didn't want that to happen. It was a terrible accident." "An accident you covered up for 36 years, William replied bitterly. "But I'm not just here for that. I need information about something else." William pulled a photo of Sophia from his pocket, one he had taken a few days earlier. "Do you know this child?" Robert looked at the photo, and his face turned even paler, if that was possible. "Where Where did you get this picture? Answer the question. She looks like... Robert stopped talking, seemingly fighting with himself. Looks like who, Robert? Like Lucy. She looks just like Lucy when she was little. Who is Lucy? Robert sat heavily in a chair, knowing there was no way to hide it anymore. Lucy was Eleanor's daughter. William's world stopped spinning. What did you say? Your sister was pregnant when she died, Mr. Thompson. We didn't know at the time, we only found out later. That's impossible. Eleanor was only 12. She was 12, but... Robert paused, gathering courage. She had been abused for months by her stepfather, Richard Stone. William felt as if he had been punched in the gut. Richard Stone, the man his mother had married 2 years after his father's death. The man who had always given him an inexplicable sense of unease. Eleanor found out she was expecting a baby just a few days before she disappeared, Robert continued. She was desperate, afraid to tell your mother, afraid of what Richard might do. That's why she started coming to the tunnel so often. She was running away from home. But how do you know all this? Because 3 months after she died, a woman showed up in town looking for Eleanor. It was Mrs. Gable, a midwife who lived in the countryside. Eleanor had gone to her in secret, told her about the pregnancy, about the abuse. Mrs. Gable tried to convince her to tell someone in the family, but Eleanor was terrified. William leaned on the workshop counter, trying to process these devastating revelations. And the baby was born. Mrs. Gable delivered the baby alone, in a small house on the outskirts of town. It was a girl. She raised the child as her own granddaughter, never told anyone the true origin. Was this child Lucy? Yes. Lucy grew up not knowing who her real parents were. Mrs. Gable died when she was 15, taking the secret to her grave. Lucy ended up getting involved with drugs, had a hard life. About 2.5 years ago, she showed up here in Red Creek with a young daughter looking for information about her origins. Sophia, William whispered, the final pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Lucy had found some of Mrs. Gable's old papers, references to the railway tunnel, to the name Eleanor. She came looking for answers, but she was very sick. An overdose had done a lot of damage to her body. She died a few days after arriving here, leaving the little girl completely orphaned. And you knew all this and never did anything. I was scared. If I told the truth about the girl, I would have to explain how I knew the whole story. I'd have to confess about Eleanor, my family, my reputation. Everything would be destroyed. William looked at Robert with a mixture of contempt and sadness. Once again, the cowardice of adult men had condemned an innocent child to suffering. That night, he returned to the tunnel with a revelation that would change everything. Rose was preparing their meager dinner when he arrived, and Sophia was playing near the fire with pieces of wood. Rose, he said softly, I need to tell you something about Sophia, about who she really is. When he finished recounting the whole story, the old woman remained silent for long minutes, looking at the child she had raised for the last 2 years. So she's your grandniece, she said finally, your own flesh and blood. Yes, and that explains a lot. Why she knew where to find Eleanor's things, why she always talked about the girl who sings, why she seems to have such a strong connection to this place. Sophia looked up from her toys and directly at William. Are you going to take me away from here, Uncle Will? It was the first time she had called him uncle, and the first time she showed she understood the family connection between them. William knelt beside the girl, taking her small hands. If you want to come with me, yes, I'll take care of you forever. And Grandma Rose? William looked at the old woman, who smiled through her tears. Grandma Rose will always be your family too. We'll find a way for us all to be together. 3 months later, William had completely transformed his life. He sold 40% of his company, using the money to create a fund to help homeless children in memory of Eleanor and Lucy. He bought a large house on the outskirts of Red Creek, where Rose came to live as part of the family, taking care of Sophia while William worked. The railway tunnel was turned into a memorial. With permission from the city, William built a small park on the site, with plaques telling the history of the railway, and a garden dedicated to the memory of victims of violence. Eleanor was buried in the municipal cemetery in a ceremony attended by dozens of people who had known the family in the 80s. Michael formally confessed his part in the accident, cooperating fully with the authorities. Due to his age and cooperation, he received a light sentence, serving community service at the memorial itself. Robert, initially resistant, eventually confessed as well when the evidence became irrefutable. More important than any legal punishment, however, was the revelation about Richard Stone. Confronted with the testimonies and evidence, Eleanor's stepfather confessed to the abuse he had committed. At 73, he was convicted and spent his last days in prison, finally paying for crimes that had remained hidden for 4 decades. On a Sunday afternoon, 6 months after the truth was discovered, William watched Sophia play in the garden of their new home. The girl had transformed, well-nourished, wearing proper clothes, attending a private school where she showed exceptional intelligence. Rose approached, carrying a tray with coffee and homemade cookies. "She's so much better," the old woman commented, watching the child run among the flowers. "Yes, she is, and so are you." "You know what impresses me the most," Rose said thoughtfully. "Ever since we left that place, Sophia has never again talked about the dead man or the girl who sings. It's as if she completed a mission and can now finally just be a normal child." William nodded, understanding exactly what the old woman meant. Sophia had been the instrument through which the truth had finally come to light. Perhaps through some inexplicable connection to Eleanor, perhaps by pure coincidence, she had guided him to the answers he had sought for decades. That night, as he tucked Sophia into bed, the girl asked him a question that touched him deeply. "Uncle Will, was the girl who sang like my Grandma Lucy?" "In many ways, yes. Eleanor and your grandmother were very much alike. Brave, smart, but unfortunately, they suffered a lot. But now they're together in a place where no one can hurt them, right?" "Yes, my dear. Now they are together and at peace." Sophia smiled and closed her eyes, finally able to sleep without nightmares. Outside the room, William stood for a few minutes watching the girl's peaceful breathing. He had lost a sister, but found a grandniece. He had discovered painful truths about the past, but he had also found the possibility of a better future. Some connections transcend time and circumstance, uniting hearts across generations. The search for Eleanor was over, but a new journey was beginning, a journey of healing, of a reconstituted family, and of a love that persists even in the face of the deepest tragedies. The echo of the past had finally fallen silent, replaced by the promise of a tomorrow full of hope. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you new stories every day to brighten your life. Let me know what you thought by leaving a comment and a rating from 0 to 10. Thank you so much for watching.